It's a beautiful spring morning in the New River Valley. And my name's Kevin Bird. I'm director of the New River Valley Regional Commission. And I want to thank Jessica Wergo and the Community Foundation for our partnership that we've had over a long number of years now. And they're hosting our event today. And the session is being recorded and will be made available on the Community Foundation's YouTube page shortly after this session wraps up today. So you'll be able to share that with other folks who are not able to join us today. This is the first part of a two-part series on housing in the New River Valley. So today we're going to talk about the regional plus local housing study. And then on May 25th, there's going to be a presentation on housing resource guide that was recently updated. And we're thankful that we had access to some local government CARES Act funds that helped provide a digital platform for that. It's on a website, it's interactive, searchable. So Jennifer and some other partners are going to overview the housing resource guide next month, and I encourage you to tune in for that one. But yeah, so today, all about the housing study for the region. A few housekeeping items for you as we get into the presentation part. Everybody came in on mute, and I would encourage you to stay on mute since we are recording it. That makes sure we'll have a really good recording. I would also encourage you to rename. If you came in under a different name, a different user or something like that, feel free to rename yourself. That's helpful because we're going to encourage you to ask questions in chat, and it's good for us if we're seeing who's asking the question. If you're not familiar with renaming yourself, you can click on your box there and you'll see three dots, and you click on those three dots and that'll allow you to rename yourself. So as we move through our presentation, feel free to ask questions in chat. We're going to get to them at the end, but I'll be watching as these come in and keeping a list of them so I can fire them away at Jennifer and Mel once the time is appropriate. So joining me today is Jennifer Wilsey. Jennifer is a senior planner at the Commission, has been the project lead on this. And she is going to talk about some of the data findings. And then Mel Jones is joining us from the Virginia Center for Housing Research at Virginia Tech. And we just happen to be fortunate this amazing state resources in our backyard. And Mel has been this amazing partner in all this. And while she's talking about strategies today, she was heavily involved in the data discovery aspect. And not only was she doing that data, but she was training our staff and other partners on working with housing data in the region. So we've come away with a lot more capacity in the region to continue to work on this issue. So Jennifer and Mel are joining me, and I'm going to just start off and giving you all a brief overview about the study and what got us to this point of getting involved with this large effort. So in about 2016, 2017 timeframe, the commission was involved with doing a lot of local government planning, technical assistance, whether it's comprehensive plans or zoning ordinance updates. And we kept hearing the question about housing across the region, and it was coming from different angles. It wasn't the same issue in each community. There was questions about how do we attract reinvestment in a beautiful old housing stock? Does our housing align well with our aging population for people who want to remain in the community? Do we have housing that works for the different incomes that are within each community? We had lots of questions on those topics. We had questions about adequate availability. We definitely know there are supply issues across the region. And we knew that coming out of this, we didn't just need to point at what issues were, but we needed to figure out how we could address them. So that was a large part of this effort, was coming away with strategies that make sense and are implementable. So we were very intentional about how we structured the effort, and we learned a lot from the New River Valley Livability Initiative process that we took on several years ago, and with a whole host of partners around the region. And one of the key things that we learned from that project design is what we implemented here, and it's called a consortium model. So the Regional Commission was the lead agency with receiving funds to be able to execute the process, but we had lots of partners engaged. And that consortium group was around 30, 40 people who were industry partners in housing across the region. And that ranged from partnership with the New River Valley Realtors Association, the New River Valley Home Builders Association, those in lending and developers. So it was a pretty broad swath of folks who are on the ground on a daily basis. And we met with them quarterly. And as we were coming up with data and hearing from folks in the community, we'd ask that consortium group if that's what they were observing on the ground as well, and they would help point us in the right direction to get answers along the way. So they were extremely helpful. We also see them as important because, as you'll learn as we go through this is not just a single sector solution to address housing in the region. It's not just a public sector issue or a private sector or a nonprofit. It's all three of those combined. So we learn together through this process, and we're already starting to see some results of that on things that are happening on the ground today, just what we've learned over the past 2 years, much less what is forthcoming. So we had a technical team, kind of referenced that earlier, with the Regional Commission and the Virginia Center for Housing Research. And we also had a leadership team that met monthly, again, working in the weeds with us and guiding us along the way. We had some great partnerships with consultants, Housing Forward Virginia. They advised us on strategies that are realistic and implementable. And then we had CZB LLC, and they're a group that helped us with housing conditions surveying. Outreach, each project that we are involved with the commission, we have outreach is a major part of that, but each project, it always looks a little bit different, which one is most beneficial. And in this case, it was really the focus groups that we did. We had over 10 focus groups with a wide array of partners involved, and the content that came out of that was so rich, and that helped us inform strategies. And I think really just gives affirmation for what the data was saying along the way. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer so she can dive into some of the data findings with you all. And then put your questions in chat and I'll watch those as they come in.
All right. Thanks so much, Kevin. So I'm going to be going through some of our high-level data findings, and these are mostly regional in nature, and I'll say that there are lots more to be reviewed and for you to dive into if you're interested in a particular locality or more regional findings, but we're just going to do some of the highlights today. So first up is when we were doing this study, who is in our region and what, where do these folks live and what attributes do they have? So within the New River Valley, almost 182,000 people living in 69,000 households. And as you can see from our chart on the right here, over 50% of the New River Valley's population lives in either Montgomery County or the two towns therein, Blacksburg and Christiansburg. What other types of people do we have in our community? And we focused a bit on some of our more vulnerable populations and cost burden populations. And I'll define cost burdened in relation to this study as any household that is spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. In our region, that equals 14,500 non-student, non-undergrad student households that meet that threshold. And within that 14,500, we have additional households that include the extremely low income, making less than 30% of the area median, households with children, and then senior-headed households who are sometimes at risk because of fixed incomes. Our region as a whole, you can see where our population centers are lighting up, and we generally understand that most people are looking for housing near their job or a job near their housing. And we have a really strong market for that in the New River Valley. 70% of our workforce also lives here in the region, which means they do not live here and then travel outside or vice versa. So that's a pretty strong housing and employment market. So some of the three of the key factors that we looked at when assessing market demand, and I'm going to unpack these in the next upcoming slides and define them as well, are market vacancy, days on market, and median sale price. One of the other great pieces of data, crucial pieces of data that we had was around 20 years of historic MLS data that we were able to use and track and graph to be able to see the trends for our region. So I'm going to unpack that in the next couple slides. So first, market vacancy is how much of our rental or homeownership housing stock is vacant at any given time, is on the market to be rented or to be sold. And for the New River Valley, that number is 3% on the whole, and then as low as 1% or 1.5% in Blacksburg and Montgomery County. And you can see we sort of give a rule of thumb that a healthy market rate sits between that 2 and 7%. Higher than 7% means there's too much stock on the market, and lower than 2% indicates a very tight market. And so you can see in parts of Montgomery County and especially in Blacksburg, we're really bumping up against that. We're too tight. We do not have enough housing stock that is available for people to buy or to rent. Days on market. This is when a home is listed on MLS, and how many days is it listed before it is under contract and purchased. Region-wide, that number was 9 in 2019, and you'll see in a graph I'll show next that we have had a precipitous drop since 2008 on days on market, as low as 3 for the town of Blacksburg specifically. And here you can see that number has just been on the decline for many years, and it indicates that homes are transacting almost as soon as they hit the market. And if anyone has been in the housing market, sold a home, has a friend who's been looking for a home, you are probably feeling this. And anecdotally, we were hearing also that many homes didn't hit the market at all. They weren't officially listed, so they were either transacted through realtors or even private. A 50% increase since 2002. But for some of you who may say, well, we had a pretty big real estate bubble in that 2007, 2008 range. Have we recovered since then? And the answer is that we have recovered and then some, even since 2008, up by 11%. The story is actually even more severe as far as the rise in our gross rent price. Regional median is $856. It's higher, obviously, in our university communities, but as a whole, up 38.5% between 2007 and 2018. Here's another sort of graph interpretation of what I was talking about with sale price, and this is broken out by locality, as well as some of our towns, and so you can see everybody is on a steady upward trend, but our outliers for the region are Montgomery County and Blacksburg. Up at the top there, you can see that they have been growing at a faster pace. This graph isolates only new construction built between 2014 and 2019, which is why we have some communities with shorter graphs, because this is only about new construction that has been transacted. The 2-point takeaway points from here, again, as you can see, the outlier of the town of Blacksburg is hovering around on top the rest of the region. But interestingly enough, the other localities in the region, as far as what it takes to construct, building cost, to construct a new home and to sell it, have started to aggregate a little bit towards the 2019 versus you can see the disparity in 2014 of all different types of sales prices. So we're seeing the cost to build is sort of the cost to build. And then finally, if we could summarize in a couple of key points, some of our takeaways around our housing need is that we have seen both from our focus group data as well as MLS data we have the strongest and most intense competition around the housing price of 175 to 275. If we had a lot more housing in that range, it would free up a lot of our demand pressure. Ways of achieving this are not all through new construction. We have our building community who is saying we cannot build a single family detached home for that amount of money. To which we say we know and we understand. But the two ways to sort of tackle this are we don't always have to build single family detached on large lots. In order to reach this price point, we can add a more diverse range of housing types. We can add our townhomes, smaller square footage, smaller lots, even small scale multifamily. All of these things can help better reach this price point. And then obviously our existing housing stock is a huge asset that we have. And if we can keep that in good condition, it can also reach some of these price points that are in high demand. And then finally, the acknowledgement that our low and moderate income households will probably always need some level of subsidy or extra financial assistance in order to reach the price points that they need to be affordable and to stay in our community. So those are just some of quick overview of the regional findings, and I'm going to turn it over to Mel, and she's going to talk about how these got turned into strategies.
Thanks, Jennifer. So we have all of these challenges, and we need to respond to them. And so what I'm going to discuss over the next little bit of time is how we can do that as a region. I want to re-emphasize that our housing market is region-wide. If you're looking for a home, you may be looking for it in a certain school district. You may be looking for it in a certain general area. You may be looking for certain qualities, a rural feeling. And you are not constricted by Montgomery County or Giles. You will choose a house that meets your needs wherever it is. And so we have this region-wide market. And so in addition to local strategies that you guys can explore later, we have these region-wide strategies, and they're a very important part of addressing the housing challenges we have in our regional housing market. First and foremost, we heard loud and clear from our consortium and from our leadership team that we need an education campaign. We need to even further unpack the findings. There's a little bit more study that needs to go on. And then there's a lot of delivery and dissemination of this information that needs to happen in order for people to feel comfortable with the challenges we face and that we need to address them, and to get on board with the ways that we could address them. A visual component of this education campaign is important because everyone can kind of manifest ideas of what they've seen in other cities and other places, but our strategies need to be our own, and they will involve housing that fits in our community. And so we want to show the visual components of that so that everybody can understand more concretely what we're talking about here. Okay, there we go. Another very important tool is Housing Trust Fund. Housing Trust Fund is like a bank account for addressing housing needs. It's very flexible. All it is a fund that allows you to address everything from modifications for folks aging in place to brand new housing for people with low incomes or with disabilities. It's a very flexible tool that the community guides how it should be used. But without it, we don't have a place to put and raise money for housing. So it's an important tool in our process. Next, where's that money going to come from? We need to partner with anchor health institutions. Social determinants of health is a large component of where we see synergy between health institutions and housing. Hospitals and doctors see firsthand the consequences of folks not having adequate housing. And so it makes sense to partner with health institutions to focus on the needs of their patients, to focus on the needs of their employees, because they're very often large employers, and in our region, that is absolutely true. And then finally, to think about how everyone can benefit, the hospital system, for example, and their patients and the region, if we all build strategies around housing together. Thanks, Jennifer. Next, partnering with non-health anchor institutions. So I mentioned that health institutions are large employers. We have other large employers in our region, and institutions that I think now that we've experienced the pandemic understand how much influence and how important these institutions are in our community, and how they impact not only the transmission of a virus, but also our housing market. We have so many students that live in our community, and the faculty that serve those students, the staff that serve those students, particularly in the university situation. We have to be thinking about partnership and how we address everyone's housing needs at the same time. Also, we haven't discussed a lot yet the economic development implications of not having enough housing. So when our market is tight, and we heard this loud and clear from companies that we talked to during the study, when the market is too tight and you're trying to attract talent, and that talent looks at your market and they can't find appropriate housing, they don't know when they would be able to get an appropriate home, they can't feel comfortable accepting a job here. And so this is an extremely important component of our economic development and future growth. Jennifer talked a lot about, or a little bit about, how we need to think about our existing housing stock as a component of addressing affordable housing needs and middle income housing needs. Manufactured housing serves an important role in our community as providing naturally occurring affordable housing. However, we have both mobile homes and manufactured homes in our region. Mobile homes are considered some of the worst housing stock in America. They were built with little code, and they are now very old, so pre-1976 mobile homes. And some of them can't be replaced because of the restrictions on the communities that they're in. Some folks need help with financing in order to replace those homes. And then we have manufactured housing, which today technology has taken manufactured housing into a place where it can be more energy efficient than a stick-built home. So it can be a quality residence. But again, we have challenges with manufactured home communities, and they vary throughout our region. So some folks struggle with landlords that aren't making improvements. Some landlords that are very good landlords struggle with inability to make improvements because of code restrictions. So this was an issue that we saw, okay, we have an important component of our housing stock here. We need to learn more about how to address it across the region, because there is a variety of experiences. So we suggest that we'll look at that a little bit more deeply and talk with residents and grasp all of the possibilities for addressing issues, taking care of those places that are good quality places to live right now, and maybe even in some cases expanding this opportunity into communities that could really house folks who need affordable housing. Then grow the building construction trade and workforce. We had lots of conversations with builders in our community. And I'd like to give a little bit of history that throughout the United States, in the aftermath of the Great Recession, a lot of builders dropped out of the market or consolidated. And so there is a dearth of builders and developers And particularly in rural places, this is an experience that is making housing development hard. And though we are in a metro area and we do have great builders in our community, they are stretched thin. They can't build them fast enough. And in addition, they report challenges with pricing of materials and of getting labor at all. Each one of the builders we talked to said that they need more subs, that the price of subcontracting, if there were more subcontractors, may go down a little bit. We talked to builders whose framers are in a different state, very far away, and coming to our community to provide concrete or framing. And so if we're able to develop our construction trade economy, we can not only provide really good and good paying jobs, but also help cultivate more capacity to build here in the New River Valley. And then provide support for an aging population. We have a growing population of seniors, not only because people are aging right here in the New River Valley, but because we're an attractive place to retire. We have some good resources in place, but we need to focus on cultivating more programming and more money to address some of these issues. And that's where, for example, the Housing Trust Fund plays an important role, because we can dedicate funding to those issues that we feel are most important, either region-wide or by locality. Like I said, it's a very flexible tool. And we can think about how to address needs for home modification or new housing within the same community to achieve our local, and I want to emphasize local, because I feel like to a person wishing to age in place, local can be on the neighborhood scale, right? But then also we know that this is a region-wide concern, and so we can put our resources together and think together to make this happen sooner and more efficiently. So now, because there's no way that we could fit all of this in to 30 minutes or even all the hour of discussion, we want to show you where you can find all the resources that came from our study. And this is a regional plus local housing study. So on the website, you're going to see both regional findings, but then places where you can really drill down to the local level. And Jennifer, if you want to hop in and describe the website, please do, because you know better than I do.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm hoping that everybody can see this, and I was trying to maybe even zoom in a little bit. But from the Commission's website, nrvrc.org, regional housing study with dashes in between each word. We learned that is important to do. We've tried to fit all the resources that you may be interested in sort of in one place, and broken down in a way that is not overwhelming, because it is a pretty large amount of work and content. So we have the flipbook style to look at the consumer report, but then you can also see that it's in its own heading, broken out by chapter. And that is a summary document of the longer technical report that Mel took the lead on. And so the detailed report is also broken down into smaller chunks, or you can download the entire document if you're really interested. And it goes into more detail than we did today on regional findings and strategies, as well as tailored profiles and strategies for each of our localities and several of the towns in the New River Valley. And so now that this exists, we want you to be able to come here
and use it strategically. So I really want everyone here who is interested in housing to, read the components of the consumer report and the detailed report that interest you. I urge you to read the regional chapters, because those have implications for every single locality. But then you can do a cool thing where you mix and match, right? You can deliver a presentation on a piece of the consumer report that you'll have read the detailed components of that, and be able to talk knowledgeably about your community and how you sit in the region, and what part of the housing market your community responds to. So there's so much good resource there. And if you have questions about how to use it, please, by all means, reach out to Jennifer or Kevin or me along the way.
Yes, and it looks like the link has been put into the chat, so you'll be able to see that.
Jennifer and Mel, really good overview. And gosh, the consumer version, as we try to approach reports, we have that consumer version, so it's a little bit easier to digest, but it's still a mere 76 pages. But the layout is really nice and easy. It flows the same for each community. And detailed report is just that. You get all the nuts and bolts that you need. So let's look at some Q&A here. We had a question from Sarah Bond about what does naturally occurring affordable housing product mean? So Mel, you used that term when you were talking about manufactured mobile housing.
Yeah. So naturally occurring affordable housing is any housing that is not subsidized, that exists in the market and is affordable to people. Very often we talk about below the median in this context, or low income below 80% of AMI. However, I like to emphasize the broad understanding of affordable. Everybody needs something that they can afford. And in our region, we struggle with providing housing all along the income spectrum. And so though we desperately need housing that is income restricted for people who get crowded out of our tight market. So people who have lots of resources very often compete better for housing. And in our market, that means that they get first dibs very often. And sometimes they consume housing that is extremely affordable to them and would be affordable to lower income households. But it's a competition. And in a tight market, those low income households really get crowded out of even the housing that they're able to afford. So it's an important thing to think about. Yeah.
Here, encourage you to submit some questions in chat. Got one from Annie Pierce. It's just the construction workforce, or is there also a need for new construction businesses?
Yeah, everything, Annie.
Both.
Yeah.
And I would love if you want to unmute yourself to chat just a tiny bit. You're welcome to. But we heard from the builders and developers here in our community that we not only need workforce, but we need entrepreneurship. And they even gave examples of those folks who have worked for them and have gone out and started a business, have been extremely successful. And so cultivating both new businesses and the workforce is really important here and actually nationwide. Yeah.
And we also talked about how the ability to run a good business and the ability to be good in the trades are not necessarily synonymous. And so some of those folks that are really great in the trades would love to be able to go out on their own, might need some extra training or support to be able to successfully run the business side of things, because we all know that that's a crucial part of keeping a business afloat as well.
Yeah, Jennifer, presentation for the Newer Valley Home Builders about 2 weeks ago, and I was shocked that one of the businesses who's been busy said, we can't really leave the current marketplace we're in because of capacity constraints. We have so much work we could be doing here, but we are willing to train up someone else who wants to work in these other communities. And that was just awesome spirit of support that's out there. So if you know people who are thinking about getting into construction, remodeling, what have you, there seems to be a lot of local support for those businesses. Annie, were you hopping in there?
I just wanted to say I see there being a lack of people with talent on the business side. You know, we're doing a lot at the university level. There's a lot going on at the trades level, locally with high schools and so forth. People that are very enthusiastic with construction skills, but that does not naturally come with business acumen or the ability to manage a business. And so that needs to be developed in parallel.
Couldn't agree more, Amy.
Yeah.
So well.
Annie, I'm looking at your next question / observation here about people seeking resources. And I guess the question is, do the agencies that provide resources, are they on social media? Are they in the right places to find the people that be able to connect with the people that need those resources? Jennifer Mel, I don't know if you want to speak to broad resources out there.
Y'all hop in for the New River Valley, but you know, there are obviously resources that are generally available for entrepreneurship, but in terms of entrepreneurship in construction or the trades, I would say, you know, there aren't a lot of specific resources. And that might be something that we think about developing here.
Absolutely. And I think the people, I'm sorry, I keep jumping in, but you know, it's an interesting problem because the people who do the work are the ones that would be making, you know, making significant capital investment. Naturally, they would want to have a significant role, but they may not have the skills to actually be making the strategic decisions. And so how do you set up the framework for that? You know, I know how to teach construction, but I haven't the foggiest idea how to set that up as a business.
Yeah,
So
and
we really need information.
there are some examples, you know, of home builders taking, like the Home Builders Association taking a more direct role in negotiating prices, for example. There are some examples of builders who part of their business model is training, and I shouldn't say business model so much as part of their mission, nonprofit builders, of training and cultivating new businesses in construction. But they're few and far between. This is a place that isn't very well, or an area that isn't very well developed. How do I cultivate a new or more of a building environment in my community? Mm-hmm.
Well, the first stop I'd recommend for anybody that's getting into business is the Small Business Development Center. And they are so well networked. You know, they're not expertise in industries specifically. They'll get you a good, solid business plan in general, but they are so well networked that they'll be able to connect you with others in the specific industries. I'm going to pivot a little bit here to a question that Ashley Dugan submitted. It's, do regional governmental bodies have any leverage to set affordable housing benchmarks, i.e. 30% of this neighborhood must be townhomes, mixed use, affordable for incoming developers as a potential solution providing housing across the entire income spectrum? Or is development already so expensive as to be discouraged in general? I'm going to break this into two parts. One is the first piece there, regional governmental bodies like the Regional Commission, we have no regulatory authority. We are merely an advisory group to local governments. So when it comes to addressing affordable housing on the ground or requirements thereof, that's going to be a local governmental decision. So we have no regulatory, no zoning, none of that. So Mel, do you want to respond on what local governments can require of affordable housing composition?
So local governments are, the main holders of power in this world, but they don't have a whole lot of it. Um, and so Virginia is pretty conservative about what it will allow local governments to require and how it will allow local governments to require affordable housing as a component of all development. So we are able to do that if we set up a program that offers a density bonus, so allows a developer to build more housing than they would otherwise be allowed to develop on a particular piece of land, in order to recoup some of the cost, if not all of the cost, of incorporating subsidized housing into the development. There are places in Virginia that have these mandatory programs, but always they're accompanied by some density bonus in order to make it more affordable. Because if you were to require the affordable housing component without any sort of incentive, it would discourage development altogether. Yeah.
So actually, you didn't do a bad job asking the question, because people often ask us at the Regional Commission, well, what is it that you do anyway? And so no, we don't have any regulatory, but I like to clarify that whenever the question comes up. And I had a question come in about really the supply availability of manufactured mobile homes. And I know we targeted a number in the study, or we identified a number, but I don't know if we really got to that point of saying, is this an adequate supply?
So I think it's really important that we emphasize that we don't have enough housing here, period. So there's not enough housing for anyone. And we have extremely low vacancy rates, extremely fast transactions, and it's all evidence that there just isn't enough. I think that, manufactured homes are an important component of what exists here now, but also what will be here in the future. And whether that is what you picture in your head as a manufactured housing community, or is modular housing that is introduced to any old neighborhood and looks just like the houses in that neighborhood. We have modular housing that was created in a manufacturing plant throughout our community, and you probably don't even know it's there. But I think that we're interested in exploring how we could introduce more manufactured homes in communities that are communities of choice, places people want to live. And there are barriers to that right now. And I also want to point out that some of the communities in our region have done a lot to protect that affordable housing, that naturally affordable housing. So there are examples in the town of Blacksburg where because a place was zoned for manufactured housing, that the town had control over, or to some degree control over, the redevelopment of that place, and to make sure that additional affordable housing was introduced. So there is some effort to protect that affordable housing, but it's clear that that protection also comes with strings and can make it hard to improve those places. So this is a very complex issue that we want to think about in more detail, because we know it's a good and viable way of providing affordable housing, if it's done right, and we want to make sure it's done right.
And the state is getting ready to, or is in the process of, a manufactured mobile home study inventory. And I think there's going to be some opportunity to dive deeper on that within the region as well. And then some questions here about workforce with the housing industry, and anybody working with New River Community College on that. Do y'all want to speak to what's happening? Trade sector.
You guys know better than me.
Yeah, I'm trying to call up the strategy, the long form strategy on this gets into a lot of different angles, a lot of good detail, even a step before the community college level with some of our VOTEC um, programs in the high schools. I know Floyd's got a good program and Giles as well. So I think that all of that is on the radar. Now, could we be doing a better job? Yes, but I think that it is. I think it's on the radar of our community colleges, and we just need to do some, some better coordination, because we, I think everyone is acknowledging how much the need is, how financially viable a lot of these trade and construction jobs can be. You can easily, support yourself and a family, and it does not take a 4-year college degree to do that. So how can we encourage or, really make sure that's an option for some folks that, a 4-year college degree is not on everybody's path. And so what are some other options so that we can get people, still plugged in to the workforce with needs that we have. So I'll have to dig back into that strategy, but it is listed on the website. And I think that there's a great opportunity to plug more into our community colleges because they acknowledge that this is a needed skill and something that they can help with.
I'm glad Peter joined us and turned on his camera because Peter is the man to be able to answer this question.
Oh, good.
Sure. Kevin and all the participants on here. I work at New River Community College, Vice President for Instruction Student Services, but busy working with workforce initiatives and right now, there are lots of funding streams coming to community colleges in Virginia and across America. So what we're trying to do is send message to the citizens that there are a lot of opportunities to get your tuition paid. And instead of inundating folks with the 50 different ways you can get it paid, we're trying to market there are lots of opportunities to get free tuition. So come and let us see what your needs are, and let's try to match your needs and your education needs with the aid that is out there. For example, the governor's new G3 program does target some of the construction industry. So we're excited about that opportunity for the citizens, and we all need to do a better job getting that word out. That's, we don't want to be the best kept secret either, right? So we market it, we pay for marketing to get that out there, but any help that, this group can do for us, we're excited about serving our citizens even better with those educational opportunities. And we do have many construction related programs, and we do have students in them, but we'd love to have more, right?
Peter, thank you for contributing. I appreciate you doing that. I know you all have partnered with the New River Mount Rogers Workforce Development Board in years past on some special workforce initiatives. And gosh, it was green building trades one several years back that seemed to be effective. Yeah.
Yes, we actually, and thanks to Marty Holiday, I don't know if Marty's on here, the great work she does there. We actually exceeded the outcomes of the grant. So we were excited about that. So.
Right. Let's see, let's talk about density a little bit here. A question came in about accessory dwellings or accessory buildings that appear to be residential. Now, I know the town of Blacksburg was talking a lot about that. And Mel, since you're on planning commission in the town of Blacksburg, and then, Kim's on too. Good. Kim turned on her camera. Kim can probably answer from staff perspective. And then, density bonus, is that the only thing local governments can do? So Kim, you want to follow up here on that question about the accessory dwellings?
Yeah, the town of Blacksburg, gosh, it was about 3 years ago, passed an accessory apartment ordinance that was for attached accessory apartments. We've only seen about 8, 9 constructed over that time frame. There were some concerns that they would be gobbled up by students, but the ones that have been built don't seem to that doesn't seem to be the case. So now we're looking at expanding the ordinance to include detached units, which we've heard from citizens that is of interest. And so that is going to be coming to Planning Commission very soon.
Well, I know that the town of Blacksburg is not the only one as well. As we've been doing zoning ordinance updates around the region, this granny flats or accessory dwellings has all resurfaced, when I think they were all in initial zoning ordinances as permitted by right in residential areas, provided you had appropriate lot square footage. And then it seemed to go away in the 80s and 90s. And now they're coming back as a creative way to allow density. And so that's a good thing. So there was this question about density bonuses. Is that the only thing local governments can do? So Mel and Kim, feel free to contribute as well. There are other things that that local governments can do.
There is a whole host of things that local governments can do, and it can start as simple as having a housing plan and being very explicit about the types of housing that you want to see. And many of our communities have done that, some more explicitly than others. I always like to point to the Montgomery County villages because they've been very explicit about the spectrum of density that they would like to see in Price's Fork Village, for example, and how that manifests in terms of size and scale. So that's an example of very explicitly saying these are the types of housing that we want to see. But it can be as simple as that. And then there are, more complex approaches that, for example, Kim can talk about the community land trust that Blacksburg is thinking about right now, and how that can be a vehicle to provide land that can be the subsidy that makes low-income housing possible to build. And it is also the vehicle by which we can preserve investments in affordable housing in perpetuity. So that's a good tool. I think that in the nation, we're starting to see a lot of interest in combining housing with public lands. So land, again, being that subsidy piece. So how can we combine county or town offices with housing? Also, partnerships with faith or institutions, health institutions, other institutions like universities have been effectively building affordable housing, again, using the land as a way of subsidizing. So that's very popular, but there are many other strategies. And if you dive into the strategy portion of the report, you'll see that variety, especially as you look at each community's strategies to try to find and make accessible affordable housing. And sometimes, there are places where the market is not as tight as Blacksburg, so it's more like in the healthy range, but folks need help accessing the affordable housing. So think home ownership education, and then, working with a housing counselor to find the financing that works. And then to get that home maybe rehabilitated or upgraded so that it meets folks' needs. So this is a complex issue, and there's lots of ways to address it. And some of those are local government led, some of it is region led, some of it is community organization led, and you will see that, all through the strategies.
I know Emily Gibson from Montgomery County is on because she contributed in our chat, which was helpful to point out that vocational study or strategies on page 29. But I will see if Emily wants to contribute here about any density things that the county has talked about.
Well, as Mel pointed out, all of our villages, plus we have 2 other UDA areas, are specifically targeted by becoming UDA areas to be places where we want to see density. And so that, as is mentioned in the study, meant that the recent 2 rezonings we had in our Price's Fork Village, it made that process cleaner because we've said that's where we want the density And we've explained sort of how we want that to be. And so I think looking at tools like UDAs, and one of our strategies is even streamlining that process even more. So even coming up with something that is in the vein of like a pattern book of, if you do X, Y, and Z, this is going to help your process, because there is a risk with rezonings. And you know, that's one of the things that we know going into it that can drive up housing costs. But I think that if you start lowering those risks, if you start identifying areas and what you want to see as a locality, you start bringing those risks down, and you'll see more creative approaches and people willing to come to the table with things like the density bonus, or things like including affordable housing units. And so that's something that we're pretty excited about jumping into here at the county, to just layer on top of what we've already got in place.
Thanks for willingness to contribute there, Emily. Appreciate it. And
Sure.
Jennifer typed into chat one of our planning acronyms we throw around a lot. UDA is urban development area. And Emily, while you're with us, can you give a quick rundown on what that means to be an urban development area?
Sure. So several years ago, the General Assembly, well, first they mandated them, but then they did back off of it, enabled localities to create these. And the goal was to really partner transportation and land use together better, because we historically haven't done a great job of that in the Commonwealth. But moreover, it also prescribed densities and floor area ratios if it's commercial, because this is something that can work really well for mixed use. So these are targeted areas where a locality says we want to see the growth, says the infrastructure will be available, and really puts that out there. And the state code enabling legislation sort of prescribes if you want to have these. But not only does it help a locality with addressing density and housing needs, but it also helps with some of your transportation scoring process. So if you're doing smart scale or revenue sharing, VDOT takes a look at whether it's in one of your UDAs, and you can typically get credits or points on an application for things like that. And so that's one of the reasons that we have all of our villages, because they basically met it before that legislation was even put in place, designated as UDAs. And then we have 2 other UDA areas. And I know both towns do too. So and some of them even connect. So it's a great partnership opportunity too.
Yeah, thanks for that additional insight there on UDAs. That's something that we're talking with Floyd County and town about a lot right now, is because they want to do some road improvements, but they weren't eligible to access funds because it didn't connect to an urban development area. And that's just how strictly or closely aligned now funding and policy is. It's good, and something you have to be aware of. Let's see, we've got about 2 minutes left before we reach the 10 o'clock hour. I think, David Moore, you put a great link in there and encourage people to go visit that. I just did that a moment ago. Build Smart Institute is a program in Roanoke, and it looks like something we want to examine a little closer in the New River Valley. And anything else in chat before we wrap up?
Kevin, if I could just add on to something Emily said a second ago, if you wouldn't mind, she mentioned the importance of transportation planning and land use planning. And this is something that's also highlighted in the report, that transportation is a major component of housing affordability and housing accessibility. So there are parts of the report, if you're interested, that dive into how that drive to qualify component of housing works. You know, I'm living a little further out so I can get the house I want, but then that adds additional transportation costs, or I need to be living right in the job center because transportation costs will sink me. Just have a look there.
Great, thank you, Mel. You know, so where do we go from here? We've done a terrific report over a 2.5 year period and had lots of partners involved. And as I mentioned, you're already seeing some things happen on the ground in the development community that's reflective of what we found with data through this process. So that's great. But then how do we keep the momentum going? That's something that I think Regional Commission will continue to convene on this topic and pull partners together. Certainly there's local implementation is the impetus here, and the communities are going to need to really build some coalitions on local items, but then there's some regional things we can do as well. But we'll continue to convene on the topic and continue to search out some resources to be able to implement. So stay tuned, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Encourage you to look at the website and reach out to any one of us that contributed today to get into more details. So thank you all very much and have a great rest of your day.